All right, guys, this is week 7, October 5th through October 9th. We are in math transitions this week, and we're going to be looking at decimals and percentages. All right, so I'm going to do a really quick lesson. I'm going to show you how to do decimals. Fractions and decimals are two different ways to represent numbers. You should be able to convert a fraction to a decimal and vice versa. So let's look at some examples. So let's say that I've been given the fraction 5/16. I want to write that as a fraction. I'm sorry, as a decimal. All right, so how would I do that? Well, think about this. When you are dealing with a fraction, that fraction bar is the same thing as division. So I would divide 5 by 16. Okay, so when I do that, sometimes you may have to go 2, 3, 4 places after the decimal to figure this out. So now I'm simply dividing. 16 will not go into 5, but 16 will go into 50 3 times. That is 48. Subtract. 16 goes into 21 times. Subtract, which is 40. And then 16 goes into 40 2 times. 2 times 16 is 32. And I'm going to go one more place just to see if it does terminate or end. 16 goes into 85 times, which is 80. So 5/16 would be 0.3125 as a decimal. All right, let's look at this one. Let's look at 2 7/20. Well, the very first thing that I would do is I would convert this to an improper fraction. We have talked about how to do that. 20 times 2 is 40, plus 7 is 47 over 20. Once again, now all I'm going to do is I'm going to divide. And I'm going to divide 47 by 20. I'm going to go ahead and add a decimal and a 0. I may need to do more. We'll see. 20 goes into 47 2 times, which is 40. All right, go ahead and bring that decimal up. 20 goes into 70 3 times, which is 60. I get 10. And I would go ahead and add one more 0 because now I have 100. And 20 goes into 105 times, which means that I'm finished. So it is 2.35. All right. Now let's look at this next one. 2 11ths. Same thing. If I want to turn a fraction into a decimal, I'm going to divide. All right, so 2 divided by 11. I'm going to go ahead and add some zeros. 11 won't go into 2, but it will go into 21 times. Subtract. 9, bring down my 0. 11 goes into 98 times, which is 88. Subtract. You should start seeing something here. You should notice that I'm starting to repeat. All right? So this is a repeating decimal. So you can write it a couple of different ways. You can write it like this. Those 3 dots tell me that it continues in the same pattern. Or you can write it like this. Get the numbers that repeat, and you can put a bar over top of the numbers that repeat. Now, it's important to make sure you put the bar over top of every number that repeats. So in this case, the 1 and the 8 both repeat, so I would put a bar over that. All right? The place value structure of a number system permits us to write any decimal number as a fraction or a mixed number. So now we're going to go from fractions to decimals to, we're going to look at decimals to fractions. So let's say that I'm given, 37.245. So this allows me to write, because of our number system, I can write this as a fraction. All right, so let's think about this. So 37 is a whole number. This is 2/10, meaning 2 over 10. This is the hundredth spot, so it would be 4 over 100. And this is the thousandth spot, so that would be 5 over 1,000. Now, because of our previous knowledge of fractions, we know we have to get a common denominator. All right, so I have 10, 100, and 1,000. I'm going to have to use 1,000 as a common denominator. This one doesn't change, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that as 5. All right. 2. So let's look at this. 10 times what gives me 1,000? 10 times 100, which is 2 times 100 is 200. 100 times 10 is 1,000. So 4 times 10 is 40. And now I can go ahead and add that together. So I get 37 plus 245 over 1,000. And I can reduce this. I can actually reduce this by 5. So I can reduce this by 5 and say 245 divided by 5 is actually 49. And 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. So I would write this as 37 plus 49 over 200, which is 37 and 49 200ths. Okay? So now let's look at how we would write some decimals. Let's go with this decimal. All right? So I don't have any whole numbers. I've got 3 over 10 plus 7 over 100 plus 5 over 1,000. Once again, I need common denominator. This one doesn't change. I'm going to leave it. 100 goes into 1,000 10 times. 10 times 7 is 70. 10 goes into 1,000 100 times. 100 times 3 is 300. So I get 375 over 1,000. I can reduce that. I can reduce that by, I know I can reduce it by 5. So if I reduce that by 5, that would be, what, 73 over 200? All right. I can probably reduce this more. Let's see here. No, I don't think I can. I think that's about as much as I can reduce it. All right, so we'll reduce it to this. 73 over 200. All right. Rounding decimals. Guys, let's kind of talk about this really quickly. When I'm rounding decimals, let's take this example, 97.38154. If I ask you to round that to the nearest integer, that means the nearest whole number. I'm going to look at the number that's after that, the 3. Since it is not 5 or above, then I'm going to keep this the same. So rounding this to the nearest integer, it would be 97. All right? If I ask you to round it to the nearest 10th, so I'm going to go to the 10th spot, and I'm going to look at the number right after it. It is bigger than 5, so I'm going to bump 3 up to 4. So 97.4. All right. If I ask you to round it to the nearest 100th, go to your 100th spot, look at the number after it. It is not 5 or above, so I'm going to leave that as 97.38. All right, I think you get the point of this. All right, so that is how to do decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals, and how to round decimals.